You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us. Hi, I'm Annie the American.
And I'm Johanna the Austrian, and you're listening to your favorite international podcast.
That's right. We're women who met online, discovered a mutual love of macabre history and true crime, and decided to start a podcast about it. That's what everyone does now, right? It's like you meet someone, you have a common interest, you start a podcast. If you have listened to us from the beginning, then you have been with us for one hell of a ride at this point. Johanna learned how to edit sound doing this, and I think she does a really tremendous job for someone who learned on the go. I really think when I occasionally have to listen back to our episodes, I'm amazed. It sounds to me like we're in the same room. It's wild. I don't know how you do it, but it's been 4 years, over 200 episodes, 3 major awards, big life changes, both happy and not. And through it all, we've still never met.
That's right. That's so hard to believe, isn't it?
Weird.
We're on different continents and have never met. That's our thing. One thing before we start, please, last chance to vote for us at thepodcastawards.com. Please, go do it right now. You have until 31st of July. If you haven't already, validate your email and vote for us in People's Choice, Best Female Hosted, History, and True Crime. Because by this time next week, voting will be closed and they'll be deciding who among you who checked that box that you shouldn't forget to check will be selected to vote for the winner. And this is the last time we'll ask you to register to vote and nominate us. We'll next be reminding you to check your emails to see if you were selected to vote in the final. That is, if we make it through, this round and get voted onto the slate in any of the 4 nominated categories. So please go to podcastawards.com. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's get on with it. No recap today. There's too much to discuss. Primary sources for today, there are a lot, actually. The Amityville Horror, the book by Jay Anson, the Warrens' website, the book High Hopes, The Amityville Murders by Gerard Sullivan and Harvey Aronson, and also The Night the DeFeos Died by Rick Osuna. Some of these we've only found excerpts from because they're out of print, really hard to get. I have not yet had a chance to read the book by Rick Osuna. I was hoping there would be a Kindle version because my eyesight is so grim, but I'm going to order the regular version and we'll see. Be interesting to see what he has to say. Have a chat with you about it. But about that book, because he comes up, he's one of the people leading, I don't want to say the leading expert on one of the big theories, which is that Junior didn't act alone. Right, so his website, AmityvilleMurders.com, says this about it, quote, "The night the DeFeos died exposes the unprecedented cover-up that was instigated at the highest levels by police, attorneys, judges, and even the mafia. The book will offer evidence to support the claim that the supernatural stories were created as part of Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s defense and were a hoax. It finally puts to rest the false myths and misinformation surrounding the Amityville case." End quote. So he's not alone in that. That is one of the leading theories. So I'm looking forward to finally reading the book. His website, AmityvilleMurders.com, is a very comprehensive database of information. And we'll be talking more about him later on. What else? Today we're going to be talking about Danny's documentary about living in the house, which is called My Amityville Horror. We also watched, I think, every program we could find, right, on any documentary ever made, anything on YouTube, the old In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy, old press interviews, TV specials, you name it. There are websites, there are Reddit posts. I mean, it's Amityville. It's everything. There are a lot of sources, but we'll send you the main ones. We'll all be linked to in Facebook. And if you're not in Facebook, just a reminder, you can always email us and we will be very happy to send you the full list of our sources for any episode.
Yeah, I think we could make like 20 episodes on this case alone and go into every little detail.
It was so hard.
But we tried to contain it to 3 episodes, yeah.
Yeah.
We asked you what your big questions are after listening to parts 1 and 2, and you emailed us and told us in the Facebook group what your kind of questions are. And today we're getting into what we know are the facts of the case. And we'll try to do some debunking and, we also look into possible explanations for some of the strange happenings. We don't have answers to all of it. Some things we'll probably never know. And in the end, as so often, it's up to you to decide what you think. We'll just tell you as much of the important stuff as we can. So let's start where we left off and tell it as we best understand it. I'm not sure if we even have the same thoughts on what happened. The Lutz family fled the house and the local press got wind of it and wanted to cover the story. The Exorcist was big business not long beforehand, and, satanic panic was starting to gear up.
Oh yeah, this was all over the headlines. I think we would be remiss if we didn't briefly mention the Kaplans and their investigation. Stephen Kaplan was an American paranormal investigator and vampirologist. He was the founder and director of the Vampire Research Center and Parapsychology Institute of America, both located in New York. He was a radio commenter and author, and he was very skeptical of the claims of the Lutz family. According to Kaplan, on February 16, 1976, just after the Lutzes left the house, Kaplan got a phone call from George, who was requesting that he and his associates at the Parapsychology Institute come out to Ocean Avenue and investigate. And so George asks him how much it will cost for them to come out and do the investigation. And Kaplan responds that there is no fee. They do this for no charge, but whatever they find will become public knowledge. And so if they find a hoax, they will tell everyone that it's a hoax. Which, fine, right?
I mean, that's what you want.
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah.
Yep. And so Kaplan says shortly after he told the Lutzes that he would be reporting whatever he found, whether he thought it was, true or false, like he was just going to tell the truth, he claims the Lutzes called and canceled the investigation. The Lutzes claim that they canceled because they didn't like the fact that Kaplan was a vampirologist. So, they went with the demonologist instead, which, who hasn't been there? It's like wondering which specialty doctor to call when you have a new, creepy rash. Vampirologist or demonologist? Who's better to investigate what's happening in this house? I would maybe argue psychiatrist, but we'll talk about that more later on.
Well, we talked about vampire science already, and I have to agree with the Lutzes here. This is definitely demon territory. The Kaplans, however, would go on to write their own book about their experience, the Amityville Horror Conspiracy, which was published in 1995. They believed that the entire thing was a hoax and claimed that George's story about what he thought was in the house changed frequently, indicating he'd been doing research on demons, poltergeister, and other supernatural topics, and not just meditation, as previously claimed.
Danny Lutz, as an adult, has said he thought George was telekinetic and could move things with his mind, which I thought was really interesting that to this day, Danny believes that he saw George move things psychically. But Danny also says that George knew how to brainwash people because of his time in the Marines and that he had all these books on brainwashing people. And I just thought that was sort of an interesting fact and something to maybe keep in mind. It was ultimately decided that there would be an investigation, a special investigation involving Laura DiDio and Marvin Scott. They worked for Channel 5 News as a producer and investigative reporter. And there were other investigators there. And then, of course, most notoriously, the Warrens. Now, the following explanation of the investigation and its findings is the most concise that we found. And that's helpful because it came directly from the Warrens' website. So, let's read the case as the Warrens kind of lay out as it happened. And then we'll also present arguments of those who believe that this is a hoax or who believe that maybe there are alternative explanations. Not necessarily any of our beliefs one way or the other. You'll know when that's happening. We just wanted to give you both sides, the believer and the skeptic. And then you decide for yourself what you think happened. So it reads, quote, The Warrens investigate. 20 days after the Lutzes fled, paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren were called in by Marvin Scott, a news reporter with Channel 5 New York, who had covered the Amityville story and worked on a prior investigation with the Warrens. A team of reporters, investigators, and parapsychologists were assembled by Ed Warren and met at the home at 112 Ocean Avenue. The Lutz family refused to re-enter the home during the investigation. During the investigation, Ed was physically pushed to the floor while using some religious provocation in the basement. Lorraine was also overwhelmed by the sense of a demonic presence and was plagued by her psychic impressions of the DeFeo family's bodies laid along the floor covered in white sheets, and a sense of physically being pushed back. End quote. Okay, but from a skeptic's view, none of that proves anything, right? Don't you think it's even unlikely that the bodies would have been laid on the floor with white sheets on them? Moving on. Quote, the research team also captured an image of a spirit that appeared as a little boy peering from the second floor. End quote. In this picture, he's standing in the doorway of the sewing room, and it's either a child or a kneeling adult. Many people think that this photo shows the ghost of John Matthew DeFeo, who had turned 9 only weeks before being murdered in his bed. That photo really is super fucking creepy. If you've never seen it, Google Amityville Ghost Boy. One really popular skeptical theory is that Paul Bartz, an investigator on the scene with the Warrens that night, is the person in the Ghost Boy photo. There are lots of pictures of the people who were there that night, and if you compare Paul Bartz to that photograph, he's got similar hair, and interestingly, many will point out that his plaid shirt is sort of really bright and vibrant in color, while the Ghost Boy's appears more of a pastel. It's actually exactly correct for the way the shirt that Paul Bartz is wearing would appear under infrared film. It sort of washes everything out. And you can also see that the shirt continues behind the railing as it would do if an adult man was kneeling. When asked if he could confirm if he was in fact the Ghost Boy, Paul Bartz allegedly responded that he respects the Warrens and has no comment, which is a kind of shitty response. Just because they're talking about the spirit of an actual murdered child with living relatives, right? He could also have just been not trying to fake anything. He could have legitimately been kneeling and looking at something, and that's what, because it was an automatic camera taking his picture. So it could even have been, in theory, it could be a picture of him and he doesn't even know it's a picture of him. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean that there's something diabolical about it. It's also interesting, I think, that in regards to the photograph, George Lutz went on the Merv Griffin show to show the photo as part of the press for the film release. I don't know. I just think that if part of your story is telling people that you recorded 45 hours of footage talking about the most traumatic thing that ever happened to you in your life, and gave it to someone else so they would write it down for you and you never had to talk about it again, would you be on the Merv Griffin show? It's something to think about.
Some believe an explanation of the photo is that it's demons, and that demons naturally can take the appearance of anything that they want to, so it could choose to look like a child, for example. It doesn't mean it's actually the ghost of a child, and folks whose beliefs fall in the middle might argue that the house maybe is haunted, but not necessarily by the DeFeos or demons. That could be the ghost of someone totally unrelated.
Yeah, that ghost didn't want any part of this. He's just like, what is happening?
Okay, that's just the first big claim. Let's see what the next finding was. Quote, the land was also found to be used by John Ketchum, a practicing black magician who had a cottage on the land prior to the construct of the Dutch colonial in 1924. John requested that his remains be buried on that property, and they remain there till this day, end quote.
This is such a weird one. There's no evidence. There was someone of that name. He lived in Ipswich, which is near Salem, and he lived near Amityville. But wouldn't it be weird for someone to die at that time, and they're like, I'm dying. When I go, take my body and put it in the wagon and then drive me to that town I've never been to and bury me there. Like, what? There was also a great thing I read where I guess they the Ketchum family was reached out to see if they had any knowledge of a warlock and black magic in the family. And they just responded that they did not. I don't know why I find that so funny.
I mean, that's the typical things where things that are close by get just mixed into the story because they make a great story.
It's all silly. Yeah.
The next one is probably one of the most infamous theories, findings, rumors. It's not great.
No.
Quote, the Shinnecock Indians also at one time had an enclosure on this land that was used to house the sick and the mad. Those in this enclosure were left to die. The Warrens believed that the suffering there had left the property with a very negative energy and dark history, and that such a negative history was a magnet for demonic spirits and the preternatural. End quote. And thus began the rather problematic Indian burial ground trope, or Native American burial ground trope.
Mm-hmm.
It all started here with the investigation findings. And the Shinnecock were in New York, but not in that part of Long Island. It's like, I'm close to the Czech border, I can drive there in like 7 minutes, but I'm Austrian.
Yeah, I think it's a really good way to view the original Native American tribes. It's different language, different food, different religious beliefs, unique cultural identity. You know, it's more like countries in Europe than it is regions of the United States. I just mean that I think when most Americans think about, for me, if I think about, you know, tribes, I think, well, the plains, and I imagine just the entire Midwest. Do you know, that's what I mean? It's like you imagine the tribes in the Northeast and in the Southwest, but it's not, it's so much more nuanced than that. And that's something, you know, I didn't really start learning about until 10 years ago, maybe. I used to think that the don't build your house on an Indian burial ground or there would be karmic payback. I used to think that was a great idea. I like the idea that if you kept on messing with these people, that there would eventually be hell to pay, right? Like they would get revenge or they would get justice. Like it would somehow change the way they've been treated since colonization. But the revenge narrative is just also all wrong because none of that is in line with their actual beliefs and cultures. So it's all awful. I read this great article on the Mary Sue. This is from November 26, 2021. It's called, quote, Retire the, quote, unquote, Indian burial ground, unquote, trope by Princess Weeks. And that's why I'm using the term Indian burial ground. So this is from that article, quote, in Through a Native Lens, a column from film critic and citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, Shay Vassar, they explain the dynamic of the trope as such and how it is especially problematic with how it is depicted in Amityville. Quote, the most frustrating aspect of the IBG is that we are talking about a bunch of dead Native people. This adds to the incorrect narrative that all Native Americans are extinct. The historical, and therefore non-existent in a modern time, image of the warrior chief and his maidens and children that just need some flute music to play in the background is the common misconception of the Native American, end quote. The trope, also called the IBG, also adds on to the mythical element of the idea people have had about Native populations, not to mention the idea that their sacred traditions are part of the past and not an active part of how life continues on. We fear accidentally invoking ancestral rage in horror films, but when it comes to something like protecting Native land in real life, none of that fear seems to exist. We understand there is this spiritual connection, but if capitalism is in the way, when potential wrath be damned, then potential wrath be damned. It's an easy way to deal with settler guilt and a way of solidifying the existence of Native American First Nation as something only connected to our nation's past. Quote, I am here to tell you that we are still here, and I am evidence of that. We are not all buried in some unmarked grave, driving a stepfather to murder like in the Amityville Horror, or turning your dead cat into some sort of demonic being like in Pet Sematary. For the most part, we are working to fill the gaps where the American educational system has failed to teach about our existence, and are attempting to reverse the harm from underdeveloped plot devices like the IBG. End quote.
one thing you read a lot when it comes to why the book is so scary, why these stories of being driven from your home is so terrifying is, as you and I discuss so often, when you're a homeowner, so much of your ability to live is tied into your home. So the idea of losing it is chilling. When I was younger and watched a horror movie that showcased a haunted house, I never understood why the people stayed there. I was like, just leave, you know? Now, it makes total sense to me. I think that's a feeling you only really understand if you're having a mortgage to pay and really try to make a place your home.
Yeah.
Right?
Just to have made it to that really remarkable place. So many people will never own a home.
Yeah.
So to be in a position to own a home is amazing. And then the idea of, you know, it's terrifying. Well, like we joke all the time, The Money Pit is now a horror movie to us.
It's true.
You know, I made Paul watch that when we had to replace a rotting beam we found when we replaced our giant furnace. And I was like, let's watch this. You won't sleep for a week. Welcome to my world.
So now we need to just briefly discuss the Warrens and why we aren't going to get too much into the Warrens.
No. So the Warrens are Ed, a self-taught demonologist and painter of haunted houses, and his medium wife, Lorraine. They were deeply, deeply Catholic. I think it's safe to call them sort of Catholic extremists, in a way. Yeah, 100% Catholic extremists. And things that they believe are very much intertwined with their personal religion, which we totally respect. There's a lot of topics that we don't cover and would never cover because they're actually very, very much entwined with religion. And we're not interested in debunking anybody's religion and faith. That's not what we're here for. The problem with the Warrens, coming from a purely scientific reporting investigative place, is for them, it's all demons all the time. Because based on their faith, it can really only be demons. So, it's demons.
Catholicism and ghosts and hauntings is actually a very difficult and multi-layered issue. It's not that our church says that there are no ghosts, other than the Holy Spirit, but it's also a bit frowned upon to believe that souls would stay attached to the earthly realm for too long. I always liked when you told me you can see why I feel at home in Catholicism because it's the most woo-woo of Christian religions, and it's true. There's a lot of woo-woo, and that's why we're so on the fence with ghosts and hauntings. In the end, your soul, you're supposed to either go up or down. There's no really an in-between for too
limbo,
long.
Though. But yeah, that ends eventually.
But that's just for unbaptized. Yeah. And it's also not, it's not on earth. It's
true. I don't want to seem like I'm bashing Catholicism. Do you know what I mean? Because I don't. It's just a hard thing. They're not really open to discussing any other thing. Do you know what I mean? With the Warrens, it's just demons. Obviously it's demons or something from hell. So the Warrens, I think a way to think about the Warrens is when the Warrens show up, they're like the Jim Cantore of hauntings. Jim Cantore, if you don't know, he's a weatherman in the United States, and he reports from the worst storms. So there's a whole thing that, if Jim Cantore shows up, you fucked, right? Get out. Jim, if you're listening, I was born in the May 77 thunder snowstorm. Yeah, he's a big thunder snow fan. But that's how the Warrens rolled back in the day, right? If the Warrens rolled up to the scene, you knew that shit was going to go down and the power of Christ would compel someone to do something because it was absolutely demons. It's demons.
Yeah. And also, I want to say, if you have to choose between ghosts and demons are definitely the more scary ones.
Way scarier. Because scarier.
Ghosts they were humans at one point.
Demons were never human.
Yeah.
No. And here's a quote by Ed about those who question anything they have to say. This is his response. Quote, "For the believer, no evidence is necessary. For the atheist and the skeptic, no evidence is possible. That settles it right there." End quote. It's well, okay, but no, sir, it does not. Because, I don't know, maybe they're right. Maybe it is demons. Maybe they're massive hoaxers. I don't know. I honestly don't know, but that's for you to decide for yourself.
So when the press got wind of what had allegedly happened to the Lutz family, of course Ronnie DeFeo Jr.'s new attorney William Weber hears about their story, and he wonders if perhaps whatever had attacked them in the house had perhaps also affected his client, leading him to reach out to the Lutzes to find out more about their story. If he could maybe prove his client was possessed, that could work, right? Attorney Weber later said that he sat down with the Lutzes over a few bottles of wine and came up with the story of the haunting, and he'd go on to sue the Lutzes, and they'd countersue more than once over the alleged haunting. Listening to the Lutzes side of things, the Lutzes met with Weber, but when they found out some of the proceeds of the book may go to Ronnie DeFeo Jr., they decided they didn't want to be part of that. And instead, they met with Jay Anson and spent 45 hours recording audio tapes for him to use to write the book, saying they never wanted to talk about it again, they just wanted Jay Anson to write it down so they never have to talk about it again, which is a convenient way to never have to repeat a complicated lie or to answer any questions. You know, if you're a skeptic, that is.
Just in case.
Unless they were promoting a book or a film. Then it seemed they'd go on camera and talk to anyone who would listen to them. They also fled New York, where they couldn't get any peace because of the relentless press, and moved to California. But let's back it up now. Let's go back to the murders. And first big question to answer is, did the house affect Ronnie Jr. in some way? Was he driven to kill by the house or by whatever possessed the house?
I think we can safely say no. So the house was not possessed, and there was nothing supernatural or demonic affecting Ronnie Jr., who has, I think, really clear indications of serious mental illness from the time he's a teenager, which is when you would expect symptoms to start to maybe emerge. Not everyone with mental health problems will abuse drugs, but if a person is abusing drugs like heroin at a young age, it's really important to find out more about what's going on. We know his parents took him to a psychiatrist at least once. We know there wasn't really any follow-through. We know he had problems at school, problems with the law, stealing things. He didn't fulfill school or work obligations. He struggled with paranoia. He was a liar. He had problems with starting fights. It's alleged that he was abusive to the family dog and hated the neighbor's cat, which he called Piggy or Pig because it was fat or fluffy. There are just warning signs after warning signs that this young man is really dangerously unwell and spiraling down a bad path, right? The red flags are out there like an oil slick on a wet track. I know that's an easy thing to say almost 50 years later, and I'm not judging anyone but Ronnie for what he did. I think he was very seriously mentally ill, but I think that he also knew murdering his family was wrong. And he knew to hide it. He knew to change his story. He died in prison in March of 2021 at the age of 69. So the whole story is incredibly sad, but I don't think there's anything paranormal at all about the murder of the DeFeo family. I just think that Ronnie Jr. was a kid who at some point had a mental illness, was raised in an abusive family, and then he became a killer. And I wish we could say that it wasn't almost a formulaic story, but it is. That doesn't make it any less tragic, you know?
I agree, yeah. So then, okay, no demon possessed Ronnie. How about the red room in the basement?
Oh, this is wild.
That's sinister, right? Hidden behind shelves and not on any house plan, smelling like blood. Scary, right? Except it was a storage area for toys. One of Alison DeFeo's friends is in a video about the haunting, and she's in the red room. It's under the stairs. And she just calmly says there's nothing scary here, it's just where we stored old toys. It wasn't that big, secret, scary space.
I literally imagined with my 12-year-old brain, I thought it was painted with blood of the bodies that were all buried underneath the dirt floor, is what I was imagining. It was just a cupboard under the stairs in the basement.
Also, it's more brownish.
Yeah, it was like that 70s brownish red sort of barn. Yeah. And they finished their basement. So I think the reason it was there was it had to literally have a place to throw all the kids' crap. Like, I can throw all the toys in there when we're having friends over, you know what I mean, or whatever. Clean up real quick, throw all the stuff in there. Smart.
Okay, now we have to tackle one of the biggest questions in this entire case. Did Ronnie act alone? According to the police, only the one recovered rifle was used. A holster was found, and one theory is it belonged to a second gunman, and while a gun was found in the water in the canal near the house, in the back of the house, back in 2012, a favorite theory of author Rick Osuna is that there was a second shooter and a cover-up. But this question is tied into if he acted alone, how did everyone stay asleep on their stomachs?
So, I might be the only one who doesn't think the sleeping on their stomach things is that odd. You know what I was struck with, though, when I was looking at the drawings of the body positions, the crime scene, there's like crime scene sketches. And when I saw the way the bodies were laying, I thought, oh yeah, I used to sleep like that, like you're sunbathing. You make a little pillow on the sand and put your towel over it, and your arms are sort of up and over your head so you can get a tan on your arms. I slept on my stomach for years. People make a big deal that one of the boys was recovering from an injury, so he had to sleep on his back, but I've had a leg in a cast and rotated in my sleep. I've been in a pillow fort post-surgery to keep me on a side and rotated. Now, you don't get a say in the position your body decides to sleep in. Madness is this. I just think if they're on like living on Long Island, you go to the beach, right? I imagine it's like here. So, I don't know. Does this make sense to anyone else? Or is there like a hereditary sleep position thing? Is that a thing? Do you know if you sleep the same way as like your sister, your mom, your dad, anybody?
I know that my nephew sleeps like my sister, and it's a very weird position. They sleep on their back, and my sister has one leg. How do I explain it? One leg is standing up.
Mm-hmm. With the knee bent?
With the knee bent, and the other leg is with the ankle on the knee.
Oh, wow.
Like if you're sitting on a chair, and my nephew apparently does the same.
See? So if both Ronnie and Louise were stomach sleepers, there's a real good chance that their kids were all stomach sleepers.
Maybe it's also something from that period. Like, I used to only sleep on my stomach for decades until I got older and realized it was really getting harder and harder on my back. So I trained myself to avoid sleeping on my stomach, actually.
It's also supposed to be terrible for wrinkles, I think. It's the worst.
No, that's possible,
You're just encouraging all that skin to fall forward. I'm curious, though, if babies back then were put to sleep on tummies. Was that a whole thing?
I think so. Yeah.
I just wonder if anybody would know, like any of our listeners would know, because it would have been around the 50s, right?
I think up until the 70s, babies were put on their belly to sleep.
I think so, too.
I'm pretty sure it was like that here. I have to ask my mom.
I thought so, too. But yeah, people out there that have children will tell us. So yeah, I think it's possible that the DeFeo kids were all just stomach sleepers who knew how to sleep really hard because, unfortunately, there was always fighting and abuse and yelling and screaming and just chaos in the house,
Since we started this episode, since we started researching it and reading and watching and everything, there are some things that I keep thinking every night before I fall asleep. And one of these things is that, remember, initially when he confessed, Ronnie Jr. told the police that he had drugged his whole family with barbiturates the dinner before.
Mm-hmm.
But when the autopsies were done, it was revealed that no one had any drugs in their system.
Yeah. And a lot of the stuff you hear doesn't mention that part. So it's still, a lot of people think that they were drugged, but they were not.
Which would make so much more sense. Then there would be no mystery about this. No questions at all.
Yeah.
If they were drugged. And I agree with you. If you live in a very abusive house and are afraid of your father and possibly your older brother, there's a good chance you've been conditioned to sleep through that noise, same way people can eventually sleep through a freight train. I grew up next to a very high traffic street and I can sleep next to cars driving. No problem at all.
Yeah.
Used to it since I was a kid. Once you hear these things enough, you really can sleep through it.
Mm-hmm.
And guns are loud, but so are slamming doors. And if they did wake up, they may pretend to be asleep to not be dragged into anything, right? You just pretend you're asleep and you'll fall asleep soon enough again. I even looked up the weather history in the area for the day because some rumors say that the murders happened during a thunderstorm and that's why nobody heard anything. And the weather history for the region for that day had just a little bit of rain around 2 o'clock, I think. Light rain, nothing major. And just a little bit cloudy and that's it.
Yeah. And we know he tied Shaggy up before the murders, either outside in the shed or in the kitchen, depending on the source that you read, because he was abusive to the dog and he knew it would attack him if he tried to touch anyone in the family. So we can add harming animals to his list of symptoms. Shaggy survived, but you do wonder whether just Shaggy's barking constantly and then maybe the way the shots were timed and the family and neighbors not wanting to hear anything was all this took. I almost wonder if maybe he shot both of his parents quickly and then waited for a minute to make sure the kids would just fall back to sleep. Or maybe the kids wouldn't have heard it over the dog barking so much, or...
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I read from experts it's supposed to be a loud rifle that he used, and it's in an enclosed area in a room.
Yeah.
It's baffling to me. I find no answer to that. I'm sorry. It's...
Maybe they were afraid that what was happening. Because Ronnie had already pulled out a gun, allegedly, and held it out to his father and pulled the trigger and the gun misfired. So maybe they thought that their parents, you know what I mean? Maybe they thought it was something between their dad and their older brother. I could see that, actually. But I wonder what would have happened if it was a usually quiet family who didn't regularly have, screaming fights and shoot targets in their yard and whatnot. It makes you wonder a lot about just society in general.
When he initially confessed, he said that he shot each member of his family and then he'd taken a shower and he did take his bloodshed clothes and put it in a pillowcase and then he tossed them and he told police where to find those items and they were recovered. By the time he went to trial, he changed his story and had that new public defender, William Weber. This is when he started to change his story over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Maybe they were guys he robbed a bank with. Wait. It was self-defense because the family was plotting against him, so he had to kill them before they killed him. He's quoted as saying in court at his trial, quote, "As far as I'm concerned, if I didn't kill my family, they were going to kill me. And as far as I'm concerned, what I did was self-defense, and there was nothing wrong with it. When I got a gun in my hand, there's no doubt in my mind who I am. I am God." End quote.
So all of his direct quotes that we know are attributable to him contain paranoia or delusions. It's why it's so difficult to believe anything he says.
Let's talk about his claims about Dawn's involvement. It wasn't until much later that he claimed Dawn had been involved. He claims she wanted to go to Florida to be with her boyfriend, Billy. Ronnie Jr. had a lot to say about Dawn, how she hated her sister Allison because Allison was prettier. We have to say the Brady Bunch aired in '69, so he was probably very well aware of the Marsha and Jen plotline. And also keep in mind, everyone in this story is aware of a lot of plot lines from movies and TV shows and books.
There are a lot of plot lines that appear throughout this story. And it's hard to think that at that time people wouldn't have been aware of them because in the 70s, how many channels were there? 5?
No.
Everybody watched the Brady Bunch, especially if you had children.
So he claims he and Dawn were going to murder the parents together, and he had a plan that she would take the kids to their grandparents' house. I even wonder if he may have said this intentionally afterwards just to, make his grandparents suffer more.
Yeah.
That the 3 kids were supposed to be alive and to be taken to their grandparents' house. But when he got back, because he had left the house in the evening, Dawn had murdered everyone. And then they started to fight and then he killed her. We were talking about this in episode 1 with Laura. That's what Ronnie DeFeo Jr. had told her as well. So his claim is he only killed Dawn, but why did he make her get in bed and lie on her stomach to be shot? wouldn't she have fought back in the room he found her in when he had returned? And I doubt she was lying in bed sleeping on her stomach after she had just murdered the whole family. So why? Does anyone really believe Dawn was involved?
Yeah, it's a stretch for me. I think it's especially hard because she isn't around. The evidence that people who think Dawn was involved present are statements she said to her parents like, I hate you, I'm going to kill you, or, do you know what I mean? 18-year-olds are notoriously hormone-fueled poor decision makers who talk a lot of shit they can't back up. You know, I mean, that is like prime, oh Lord, 18-year-olds. Help us all. I can't see any single thing that makes me believe she was in on it. She just has no history of any trouble anywhere at any time. I find it really hard to believe that rather than disobey her parents' wishes and going off to marry the man she loved, you know, like her mom had, because that's what her mother did. Her grandparents hated her father, and against their wishes, she went off and married him. So it's not like, I just don't know. So yeah, instead of, you know, just going off and marrying this guy like her mother had, she decided to go for plan B, which was to murder everyone. That seems like a really extreme leap to me. Don't you think? What do you think?
I don't know. She's one of the victims, so I really don't want to make her into an accomplice of her own murder. I could maybe see that maybe Ronnie Jr. and Dawn talked about, you know, maybe after a fight with the dad got aggressive again and they talk about doing something. And, you know, maybe for Dawn it was just like blowing steam off or even joking in these kind of situations. You know what I mean?
I do.
And then this idea started to fester in Ronnie Jr.
I could see that. I could see her making one just really angry comment and Ronnie running with it. Do you think he had help from any of his friends? Does he have friends? I mean, he did.
He had friends because he always had money to party and buy drugs. So friends, you know, in air quotes. Yeah.
He had friends to take drugs that he bought. But did he have friends to help him murder people? Like that kind of friends? I just don't think
I mean, if they are like depending on him for
maybe
getting drugs or it's possible. I see that possible. I see that as possible because to me, really one of the big questions as well is, I don't know, it's so hard to imagine that he could subdue 3 grown-ups. So, Senior, Louise, Dawn, 2 teenagers, and a kid, 9-year-old kid, all by himself. If there were more people involved, threatening the victims with guns, you know, keeping them at bay, it would at least make sense. Because Ronnie Jr. then would have time to go from room to room and from floor to floor to shoot all of them. But still, why the children? I can see a motive for the parents if it was because Ronnie Sr. was violent and Louise did nothing against it. But then murder the siblings, it doesn't really make sense because, I don't know, was it for money? They talk about the life insurance, the house. Everything would have gone to him.
Yeah.
If he could have made the police believe that it was a hit by the mafia. But again, yeah, that would make sense because for that everybody had to die.
Well, and there's also that very famous quote, another quote by him, which is, I don't have it exactly, but it's, to paraphrase, it's something along the lines of like, once I started shooting, I just couldn't stop. I had to keep going. So it's like, once he started shooting, everybody had to go. But I did see a program, where it was mentioned by Laura DeFeo again, and she mentioned there was also a rumor at the time. This is the first I'd ever heard, but she said there was a very popular local rumor at the time of the murders that the family had a lockbox that contained $200,000 worth of cash and jewelry, approximately, belonging to Louise and her daughters, and that this is in addition to the life insurance. So there was the life insurance, but there was also supposedly in the house just a lockbox full of hundreds of thousands of dollars of cash and jewels, because Ronnie bought his sons speedboats and cars and guns, and his daughters got jewelry. So some wondered whether Ronnie also wanted that in addition to the life insurance, because that would have been a good start, like if he could have gotten away with all of that money. Some people wonder if the Lutzes might have found the money. Like, did a kid find it? And then they all of a sudden decided to get the hell out of Dodge with this nest egg, you know?
I don't know. It's just, it always, I'm always a little bit skeptical when things are like
Have to be
200,000 and 200,000. It's too convenient in a way.
Yeah. These are just rumors. And a lot of these are just rumors that some of these I'd never heard of before. And it's like, well, that's interesting. And if it's true, that's interesting. But you just have to take all of it with a grain of salt, because it's, I don't know. He also claimed his mother was involved, which again, until I learned about him hurting the dog, and I'm sorry I keep going off on these little tangents, but this is what I studied in college and I'm fascinated by it. Because until I found out that Ronnie had not just tied Shaggy up, but had a history of abusing the dog. He hit the dog, he kicked the dog, he wasn't nice to the dog. But then I started thinking differently about the way he behaved with other things, right? Because I started to wonder if some of the lies he made up were just to intentionally hurt his grandparents. Like, he already hurt everybody he could. The only people left were his grandparents. So I don't know, and there's no way to know. But I sometimes wonder if some of these lies that he made up, like his mother was involved and totally shot the kids, or, it was so sad. And Dawn was supposed to take the children to your house where they'd be safe, but instead they were shot. You know what I mean? I can see, I wouldn't have thought him capable of that level of cruelty until I learned about the animal abuse. And then it was like, okay.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't have even have needed to hear about the dog to think he enjoyed tormenting his family or the family that was left.
Yeah, I think so.
Especially maybe, I don't even know when he said that, but remember in episode 1 we talked about how Michael Brigante first paid for his defense and then he was like, well, I'm sorry, but you're on your own now. And maybe that's also some kind of revenge there, hurting them more.
It could very well be.
What else? A holster for a handheld gun was found, but no pistol, as we said. What happened to that gun? We mentioned it briefly before. Allegedly, the gun was found in 2012 in the Amityville Creek behind the house. And there are many, including a documentary filmmaker and author, who think there was a second shooter. I don't want to call it shooter because no other gun was fired, but a second person with a gun.
Yes. That's the Rick Osuna's is the author there, that we mentioned before.
So is that the evidence that at least one other person was there that night? Maybe holding them at gunpoint, as I said, while Ronnie Jr. moved from person to person, from room to room. Absolutely possible. But it's also possible that if that was even the gun that belonged to the holster, that it had been thrown into the river sometime before the murder, because as Laura said, they did shooting practice on their property. Who said somebody didn't get mad and just, threw the gun into the water?
Right. And that's the other problem. Like, if you are regularly firing guns on your property, people might not respond when they hear guns being fired on your property.
So yeah, it's possible there was someone else involved and they held the other gun as a threat to keep everyone on their stomachs. Possible. I don't know. What do you think?
It's possible, but I think the theory I like most is that they just slept through it.
There's also another Ronnie Jr. quote, I guess the Amityville Horror really is supposed to be me, because I'm the one that got convicted of killing my family. I'm the one they say who did it. I'm the one that's supposed to be possessed by the devil. End quote.
Even there, he's feeling bad for himself. Poor me. I'm the one that was convicted of murdering my entire family. I'm the one that was possessed by the devil. And he's right, because what he did to the family was the real Amityville Horror. All right. We still have to get to the haunting. Okay, let's run through this. Talk about some of the really big claims made about the haunting that are directly from the Warrens' site. So, from the Warren site, it says, quote, a Catholic priest arrived while the Lutz family was unpacking to bless the home. As the priest made his way upstairs to the second floor, entering the bedroom which had formerly belonged to Mark and John DeFeo, he began sprinkling holy water, at which point an unseen voice told the priest to get out. And out he went. He hastily did. Okay. And then it continues. The priest did not tell the Lutz family about the voice, But he did warn them, quote, "Do not use the upstairs room as a bedroom, and do not let anyone sleep there. Yea, for there are demons." Listen, don't want to worry you. Like, not to worry, but, if you could just make sure that no human beings step foot into that room, that would be super. Thanks. So, okay. Back to the Warrens. Okay. So, going on. Although ominous, the Lutz family abided by the words of the priest and turned the room into a sewing room. End quote. So, there's a lot of debate that any of this really happened. The priest, who used a pseudonym, was reported to have given different accounts to different people about if he was even in the house. He appeared in Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of, and he was disguised. He didn't sound like this, though. But he was disguised. And he said that when he was there, he felt a cold spot and heard "get out." And listen, I know this is a shocking possibility, and I am no professional ghost debunker. But it's the day they're moving in. The doors are open. The kids are running around, unpacking in their brand new bedrooms. Might one hear someone shout a "get out" as a parent yells at the kids while unpacking china, or one of the kids goes into the other kids' rooms? Any number of reasons a family member yells, "Get out, you didn't lock the bathroom door and you're halfway through peeing." I mean, so many reasons. In a house with doors wide open on the water, in the winter, in the Northeast, I'm just saying, maybe, if he even ever went to the house, that wasn't paranormal. Just maybe.
It's a possibility. Also, the priest never had to deal with the flies. That was just in a movie. Only the Lutzes saw the flies. Danny, as an adult, remembers swatting around 100 flies. He counted them all. And going to show his mother, and they had vanished. Aren't there flies in The Exorcist, that came out in 1973? I think you see where I'm going here. Okay, next it reads, quote, "From the very first night they moved in, the family claimed they felt strange sensations. Within days, the family's personality had drastically changed. Arguments ensued." End quote.
Okay, so for me, spoiler alert on what I think is the overriding my theory now of what happened in the house with the Lutzes, but this is where I sort of start to see evidence that George is maybe having his own psychotic break. Unlikely as it seems, I think the thing that makes this case unique is it is two instances of massive consequences following a psychotic break that just happen to have occurred in the same house. Because it's not just that arguments ensued, right? In the book that both George and Kathy, contributed to, they freely admit regularly to beating the children. Not spanking the children, not giving the children a swat, beating the children. In my Amityville Horror, Danny talks really candidly about him being absolutely terrified of George. He says he hated George. He said George beat him up all the time. George forced him to call him dad. He talks about running away as a child. Now, they moved into this house. He was 9. So he's 9, and he's talking about wanting to run away. He's talking about the many times he tried to kill George when he was a kid, which makes one wonder if maybe some things like lions to be tripped over were attempted murder by potential children, just in theory. But George is having a problem, and it continues. So this is from the Warrens. It says, quote, "George was plagued by a constant chill and spent all his time feeding the fireplace. George also noticed a change in his grooming habits, and his and Kathy's health declined drastically." End quote. Again, clear indication of a rapid decline in mental health. In the book, it's often made clear that George is the only one feeling the freezing cold. George is the only one waking up in the middle of the night at 3:15 in the morning. He's the only one hearing band music. He's the only one hallucinating that doors are ripped off of hinges and windows are smashed and banisters are shattered. And, of course, Kathy's health is deteriorating. The man she married less than 6 months ago is beating up her kids, snapping at her, refusing to shower or go to work. He's up at all hours, and she's exhausted. from all the coffee and cigarettes and making list of the presents that she's not going to buy for the children because the house just wants her to stay there. I mean, it just feels like they listed every shitty thing they did as parents and were like, demons. Not that I'm bitter. Just kidding. I'm very bitter. I've been messaging Johanna throughout this whole thing going, I'm so bitter.
Thinking about it, could a fungus in a mold have played a part in Kathy and George's health decline?
I don't think so. Because I think the next owners would have noticed something. That house has been remodeled a bunch of times.
But in theory, it could be a cause for that.
It could be, in theory.
Okay, it continues. Quote, the Lutz's daughter began spending all her time in her room playing with an imaginary friend. She described as red-eyed pig called Jody, who could transform not only shape but size, at times being larger than the house. Jody also claimed she could not be seen by anyone unless she wanted them to. End quote. I mean, what else is that kid going to do? She's just sitting in her creepy rocking chair being a creepy 5-year-old. Kids say creepy things all the time. We all know this kind of posts and articles where people, write the creepiest things their
so
kids
funny
say.
And creepy. It's scary when it comes
so
from a kid. Scary kids are scary.
It's interesting that her imaginary friend that's in the window with the red eyes is a pig, which is what Ronnie Jr. used to call the neighbor's cat, who would sit in the tree outside the house and stare into the upstairs window. I think somebody claimed that the cat was also called Jody, but I think that's a reach there, but just to put it here.
It's possible.
One other thing, ever since I saw the movie, I wondered how someone would see red glowing eyes in the dark and immediately think pig. First of all I know about pig's eyes is that they look rather human-like, but other than that, I wouldn't be able to immediately identify pig's eyes in the dark. I don't know, if I see glowing eyes in the dark, I would rather think any of the plethora of nocturnal animals.
Possums.
Or cat. Cat, that would be my first.
Raccoon. So many things.
So much.
Before you'd get to pig on the second story window.
Yeah, it's just...
Yeah.
Can you picture pig's eyes in the dark
No.
right now at the top of your head? Nah, it's not the first thing that comes to mind. And they think pig before Jody even says her friend is a pig, right? As far as I remember.
That's a very good point.
Continuing. Quote, mysterious foul odors would emanate from different locations of the house. Black stains appeared on the toilets and ceramic fixtures. Kathy was touched by an unseen force and a green gelatin substance would appear throughout the house. End quote.
I'm still really bothered that in the book he tastes the slime. Blech. Some people think that the green gel and the black stains are references to that. There's that one photo showing a door in the house after the murders, but it's not obvious that it was taken after the murders. And they'll say, look, you can see the green goo on the door, but it's fingerprint powder. It's just the picture I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, listen, if there's a terrible sewer smell going on somewhere and you're absolutely sure that none of your animals have left you a surprise, call your septic company or make sure there's nothing going on with your plumbing that you're going to regret, or your gas company to make sure you're not in a dangerous situation. It could be paranormal, and so could the smell of perfume they experienced. Or it could be a spot on the carpet where perfume was once spilled. It's really hard to know without seeing it yourself, and I don't trust any of these people.
That's like I once came home from walking the dogs, and Philip was not home at the time. And I entered the house, and the entrance smelled like men's perfume. And I was like, what the hell is going on? And I thought of an intruder.
Yeah.
So I checked every room in the house, made sure nobody's in the house. And then after checking everything and still smelling this man's perfume, I realized that a couple of hours before I had taken Philip's jacket out of the car and put it in the entrance. And he had used a different perfume that I was not used to. So
perfect. Yeah. I don't know. All right, let's continue. Quote, hundreds of flies appeared in the sewing room despite it being the dead of winter. George would wake up nightly at 3:15 a.m., which coincided with the time the police felt the DeFeos were murdered. George also awoke one night to witness his wife transform into a 90-year-old hag, and the next night she began levitating over the bed. End quote. Hag was their word. Oh boy. So a skeptical view of that one might be that in the book, again, with my feeling that George may have had a psychotic episode, because there is a lot of pages where George is laying awake at night, wondering if he's made a huge mistake marrying a woman with 3 little kids and adopting the children right after his annulment with the Catholic Church from his first wife, who he could find nothing on. Then he buys a house he can't afford, but rationalizes where to save the money by moving the business he had only just recently inherited. So, moving, divorce, getting married, changing jobs are all among some of the absolute top stressors in our life, and this guy has got fucking party bingo. I'm just saying, maybe, you could argue that we are just watching this man's mental health slowly collapse, and he's taking his family with him. The same thing that happened to the last owners. It's just a bad coincidence.
Absolutely, yeah. This man was stressed out.
Yeah.
Definitely.
He was not a well man.
Continuing, quote, the Lutz family tried on numerous occasions to contact the Catholic priest, only to find the phones would cut out whenever they would try to call, end quote. Maybe that's paranormal. There's often paranormal activity reported around things with electricity. Also maybe it was the 70s and phone lines in winter weren't great. I don't know how it was in the US, but I can see that happening.
Yeah, they weren't great. I regularly, even in the 80s, remember saying, oh, hang on, let me try to call you back. This isn't a very good connection.
Yeah. It goes on, quote, after failing to get the priest to return, the family took matters into their own hands. Armed with a crucifix, they walked throughout the house, reciting the Lord's Prayer. A chorus of voices erupted in response, asking them, will you stop? The final night was reported to be the worst. Banging and rappings as loud as a marching band emanated throughout the house, furniture being moved by its own accord, and the children being terrorized, end quote.
Yeah, this is the night when, like, the children's, and Danny still remembers, like, his bed being raised up and down and banging around and running from the demon and all of this. And I just wonder is it possible that George could have dragged Kathy into his mental health breakdown in a sort of folie à deux situation? You know, I think that people struggling with mental health issues can really mask it sometimes. And it's sort of fascinating what people have believed because a trusted loved one that they didn't even realize was struggling with mental health had told them. You know what I mean? I just wonder, between that, George's alleged past brainwashing skills in the military, like, did he just take the family with him? I don't think anybody, like, is it possible that nobody was actually trying to hoax anybody? Like, that's why they would have passed lie detector tests, that there was never a hoax on their behalf. Could he have just had, like, a one-time total nervous breakdown and taken the whole family with them? Because the children were so young that they're going to remember whatever the parents told them happened.
Definitely.
As truth. So I think it's important that they're all dealing with the very obvious trauma they suffered, but I'm not sure that their accounts, not that they aren't valid, but just it's a difficult thing because of what they've said about themselves, about George's, you know, potential abilities. Danny left home as a teenager and changed his name back. Interestingly, it seems like when he did that film that he did, My Amityville Horror, it looks like his ex-stepfather sued him for copyright infringement. There's a lot of, for people who never believed in anything paranormal and they knew a lot about the paranormal and they really got legally involved with a lot of, do you know what I mean? There's a lot of suing people. It's very American.
I don't want to get sued.
No, it's terrifying. These people sue everybody all the time.
You know what I was just thinking about when you talked about the mental health and the children remembering them as horror event, maybe, or misinterpreting it. Did you ever see the Babadook?
No, but I'm familiar with the story, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, it's this, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, it's this story about The kid and his mom live in this house, and the kid is actually, the mom convinces the kid that there is this monster living in the basement or in the house that is the Babadook. And in the end, it's revealed that it's basically the mother's mental health issues.
Oh, God, that's
the real
sad.
horror there. Yeah.
Yeah, but exactly like that. Because not that much really happens to Kathy. Kathy experiences, like, at one point she feels someone hug her, she feels someone touch her hand.
Yeah.
Like, her experiences are pretty much described as comforting. Moving on.
What about activity in the house after the Lutz? There was none, right?
Nope.
None at all reported by the next homeowners, and there were a couple of them. I think the biggest problem for the homeowners were the looky-loos. I guess in that case they were extremely intrusive. Maybe they still are, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a really big problem. And it's one thing if you want to, like, drive past. I'm not saying don't ever be a looky-loo. It's just be careful. When we were in Coronado Island, we drove past the house many times, and I walked from the hotel to the house where the deaths had happened. I have a picture of me in front of the house from across the street. I would never step foot on the property or take a zoom lens out or invade their privacy. It just has to stop. Like, people trying to take souvenirs off the house.
Yeah.
It's really, that's a problem. They changed the windows, which is a shame.
No, the address was also changed.
That's right. Yep. But one question is, did no one experience activity after the Lutzes moved out because it was never haunted to begin with and it was all a hoax? Or did it stop because, as Lorraine Warren claims, it was exorcised and they got rid of the demons? So,
I mean, that's also possible.
gotta think about it. Here are some, like, contradictions that we struggle with a little bit, and just this is our own, like, little things that we're like, One thing that bothered me is in the book, and George himself in his interviews that I've seen, he kind of makes a big deal about how sick he became every time he went near anything Catholic. So he went into a church, he felt nauseous. And then he talks about feeling really sick when he takes communion. And I was like, hang on, when do non-Catholics have permission to take communion? There is so much discussion of the Catholic priest and his stigmata and his blisters and his flu. And we don't even know if he ever stepped foot there. I think you're mentioning earlier The Exorcist having come out the year before. I think maybe Jay Anson was like, you know what this book needs is more creepy priest stuff. I don't know. But as far as I know, if you haven't gone to your first communion, then you're not going to be offered a communion wafer. That's just not how any of this works.
In this case, because the priest knew he was not Catholic, if any non-Catholic would go in any Catholic church and nobody knows that person there, and he stands up and goes to the communion, there would be no problem at all to get it. Nobody's gonna ask you for anything, but this priest knew.
Shh, don't tell them about the card, Johanna. The secret cards we carry. Yes, I've been. No, exactly right. The priest knew that he's a non-practicing Methodist.
You know what I've been thinking also? I've been thinking a lot these last couple of weeks. How much did this all... Okay, hear me out. How much did this all influence Stephen King's The Shining? Because I see so many parallels. The haunted place, a murder that took place before the family gets there. In The Shining, it's the hotel. Ghost kids who want the small child to play with them forever and ever and ever. The dad going insane and plotting to murder his family. The lion statue who bites people in the Amityville house reminds me of the hedge animals who come to life.
Oh.
George hears marching bands. In The Shining, he hears dance music. The beautiful young woman who turns into an old hag. What else? Something else I remembered. The Indian burial ground that was not in the book The Shining. I think that was just Kubrick hinting at it with some kind of, things he hid in there.
Yes.
I'm sure I could think of more. And I checked again, and The Shining came out in January of 1977. And the Amityville Horror came out in September of 1977. So now I'm asking myself, how much of the haunting was
influenced by The Shining?
Well, or was the haunting, like, so many details were they reported in the media, which I don't think. So now I'm wondering if The Shining was more of an influence for the Amityville Horror book. Or was it all just, very fashionable tropes at the time? But it's a lot of parallels, in my opinion.
It is a lot. And it's funny, I was just watching something on the Manson murders, and I thought of you when they were talking about the Beach Boys influence. But anyway, I was reminded, of course, the whole piggy thing coming up with that. And then that was 1969. And then The Exorcist was big on the flies and the priests, right? And doors coming off their hinges.
That's a lot. It's a lot.
Jay Anson died in 1980. He was only 58, but the book was a huge success. He made a lot of money off of it. And having reread it, first of all, the Kindle edition is awful. It's not broken into chapters. There's 2 chapters. The first chapter is maybe 10 pages, and the second is the rest of the book. So that was fun. And it all left me kind of feeling bitter. I feel like I was so terrified. I was so scared of this book when I read it around the age of 12, and now I'm just sad and kind of bitter about it because I feel like it's people profiting from a couple of just really awful things. I think that's the story of 2 mental breakdowns with really dire consequences happening in the same house, one after another. I think George Lutz had a psychotic break and made the whole family kind of believe in his hallucinations and delusions, but that's just my theory. According to the Lutzes, and in the book The Amityville Horror, the front door of the home was wrenched open and hanging from its hinges from the inside. But apparently when they looked at it, it was the outer storm door, like the little screen door, not the massive door to the house, the one that George said looked like a bomb went off. The next owners, the Cromarties, I can't remember which, there's a piece where they basically are like, come in, let's show you the house. And she's like, this is the door that was supposed to be broken, and these are the original windows still. And she's basically showing all of the things that they claimed in the book had been destroyed by this demonic activity. There's just none of it. There's nothing. And so Ed Warren, of course, in an interview explains this by saying that what happened in the house to George was a psychic projection. So although everyone was in the same room, to George, it looked like the doors had been ripped open and banisters broken, but it was only a vision that the demon wanted him to see, right? So that's Ed's explanation.
We heard stories like this. I get what he means.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically hallucinations, as you said, but caused by an evil entity in the house.
Exactly. As opposed to maybe George was hallucinating. It would be so interesting to hear from people who knew him after this. I wonder if it ever happened again. I would be curious to know. I hope not. I also think it's 100% possible that the Lutz family believed this as much as he did. I wouldn't be surprised if they could all take and pass polygraphs. People make a big deal about the polygraphs that they took, but I think the thing that we have to remember is that there isn't always intent with deceit. Right? I don't know.
Sometimes you even start with intent, but you start to believe your own deceit at one point.
Absolutely.
It's possible, yeah.
Totally possible. I don't know. At the end of the day, we don't really know what happened. Nobody knows for sure what happened. Everyone who knows is sort of gone now, so it's really up for you to decide. But ultimately, just remember the real horror, which was the murder of the Brigante DeFeo family.
Absolutely.
All right. We also wanted to send a shout out to our listener, Cassandra's husband, who is going through a rather painful recovery, and we are thinking of you and hoping you're healing up nicely.
Get well soon, and really hats off for staying so cool in that situation, doing the right things and knowing what to do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
My something good. Yes, my something good is that next week I'm going to the opera with my sister. It's in an old quarry.
Oh.
I've been there many times already, but I go with my sister. We watch my favorite opera, which is Bizet's Carmen.
Carmen.
Which is fantastic. And I'm so looking forward to it. It's really a fantastic atmosphere in a quarry, outdoors.
Oh, I hope you have the best time.
It's going to be great. How about you?
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I've just been having a lot of really great times with my nieces lately. I just had a really wonderful visit with one of my nieces, and I'm getting ready for another visit with more of the nieces. And yesterday, as you're listening to this, is also one of my niece's birthdays. She's in Nottingham. So yeah, it's great.
Happy birthday.
It's exciting. Yeah. I have a girls' week coming up, and I just bought so much tie-dye supplies because I just keep thinking, I'm like, what did I used to want to do when I was like 10? So we're doing tie-dye. I'm bringing all my nail polish. It's going to be a good time.
Awesome. If you enjoyed these 3 episodes, or 2 of them, or 1, or any of our other episodes, please do us the huge favor. Go to your podcast app and see if you can leave us a rating and or review. Also, go to freshhellpodcast.com. There you find all the links of all the things you might want to know, like our PO box, our email, a link to our Patreon, to our new merch store, to our Instagram. That's the kind of things. You can join Patreon also via patreon.com. Search for Fresh Hell Podcast. We pop right up. We have 3 tiers. Today, after recording, we're going to have a get-together with our Murder Tier patrons talking about the Amityville Horror, a little informal chat.
I'm a little worried that we're gonna finish our chat with them and be like, well, shoot, now we have to re-record because we forgot to talk about law. I know we've forgotten to talk. We know that there's
so much stuff.
So much that we have not talked about.
There's also the possibility to join our Patreon program on Podbean if you use this app or go to it via browser. Please join our Facebook group. It's fantastic. It's the best group out there. It's always so supportive, interesting, and funny.
It is, really.
The best little group of weirdos out there.
It really is.
And I think that's it. Please tell all your pets we said hi, all your chubby cats that are called pig, all the pigs that are called cat, and everything in between. Cuddle them, hug them, treat them nicely, take them to the vet.
Yeah.
Really treat them the best you can.
Yeah.
And be kind to them. Be kind to your fellow human beings, at least most of the time. And most importantly, be kind to yourself. And that's the hardest part of it all.
And if you're going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Bye.